If it's Thursday, 1 month in office, and White House officials are moving with dizzying speed to execute President Trump's sweeping agenda, as new polling shows Americans are divided on the president's performance and his unprecedented exercise of presidential authority. Plus, President Trump moves to terminate all taxpayer-funded benefits for undocumented immigrants, but leaves open major questions about where the administration will draw the line and whether vital services for undocumented children could be impacted. And new reporting on what was happening behind the scenes as a war of words publicly erupted between President Trump and Ukrainian President Zelenskyy, signaling a potentially historic upending of U.S. foreign policy in Europe and with Russia. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Gabe Gutierrez in Washington. Today marks 1 month of the second Trump administration, and new polling shows Americans are divided on his performance, his agenda, and his unprecedented actions, slashing the size and scope of the federal government with help from tech billionaire Elon Musk. The public is also leery of the president's vast and at times legally questionable exercise of his powers. A new Washington Post poll shows that 57% of Americans believe he has gone beyond his authority as president. And a new CNN poll has 52% of Americans saying he's gone too far, with 39% saying his actions have been about right, and 8% saying he's not gone far enough. Both polls have President Trump's job approval rating below 50%, although they still are some of the highest numbers he's ever had as president. White House officials today spiking the football on what they call a month of success.
He has packed 8 years of transformative action, restoring this nation, restoring our laws, restoring fairness, restoring economic opportunity, restoring national security in just 1 month. No one in this country has ever seen anything like it.
We're incredibly optimistic about the future of inflation and the future of our economy, and we're optimistic because we're making so much progress so far.
Trump is on what we call Trump warp speed. We are all honored to be really serving under his leadership and his vision.
Today also saw more action in the president's push to cut federal spending and staff at key agencies. Thousands of IRS employees are bracing for layoffs, potentially as soon as today, with many dismissals expected to hit employees working in the enforcement division, with tax season underway. Under Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, the Pentagon says it is pushing for an 8% cut in the defense budget, with savings going toward President Trump's priorities. At a conservative conference today in Maryland, Vice President Vance praised the Trump administration's commitment to cutting the spending he deems wasteful.
What are we doing with all of the American taxpayers' money, and why are we wasting so much of it on garbage that the American people either aren't aware that we're spending it on or don't want to be spending it on in the first place? Right. And I think all of us are sitting around and asking, what the hell have we been doing with the American people's money for the last 4 years? Let's turn off the spigot and spend the American people's tax money on the American people's priority. And that's, of course, been a big focus of the administration, too.
The new polling does show there are some caution flags for the White House. The president's decision to give Elon Musk a prominent role in his administration, his attempt to shut down USAID and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, are all not popular, according to that CNN poll. And 2/3 balk at the president's funding freezes, according to that Washington Post poll, saying he needs congressional approval first. Republicans in Congress at this juncture are largely cheering on the president, today confirming his hardline pick for FBI Director Kash Patel, and one of the few remaining Republican senators willing to even gently push back on the president announced his retirement today. Here's Mitch McConnell, the longest-serving Senate leader in history, using his remarks on the Senate floor to remind his colleagues of the Senate's institutional strength.
On this floor, there is no place to hide from the obligations of Article 1, the Senate's unique relationship with Article 3, or our role in equipping the powers of Article 2. There are any number of reasons for pessimism. but the strength of the Senate is not one of them.
So let's bring in some of my NBC News colleagues. White House correspondent Yamiche Alcindor, senior national security correspondent Courtney Kube at the Pentagon, and Capitol Hill correspondent Julie Tsirkin. Thank you all so much for being with us. Yamiche, I want to start with you. It's been quite a month. What else did we hear from the White House today?
Has it been a month or a year? I'm not quite sure. It's been quite a month, Gabe, and there was a lot to talk about at that press briefing. They started talking about immigration with Stephen Miller, talking about the fact that the president feels very good about the low number of border crossing, as well as the immigration policies and executive orders. We should note that the president has signed 73 executive orders. A lot of them had to deal with immigration, but there was also other things, including tariffs, including changes to the DEI programs across the country, as well as creating DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, where we've seen so many cutbacks to the federal workforce. So the Trump administration says that they're feeling really good about this situation right now. And we saw that because we saw a number of other officials, including, of course, Kevin Hassett, who's overseeing the National Economic Council, as well as the National Security Advisor, Michael Waltz. He also took to the briefing to talk about sort of his views on the war and ending the war in Ukraine. So a lot to talk about, but the Trump administration feeling like moving at lightning speed is the way they want to continue to go, Gabe.
So, Yamiche, about the IRS, what do we know about the expected layoffs there? And are they going to hurt the way the government processes applications and catches tax cheats?
Well, it's a key question because this is, of course, the height of tax season. And our understanding is that thousands of people will be getting laid off at the Internal Revenue Service. Most of them will be probationary employees who have been with the government for a year or two. Kevin Hassett, again, the head of the National Economic Council, was asked about this. And he said that he does not believe that these cuts are going to impact the government's ability to process tax returns or to go after people who maybe aren't paying their fair share in taxes. But he also said that some of these people are being laid off for poor performance. And there has been some pushback with some employees, federal employees across agencies, showing that they actually had excellent performance reviews. But Kevin Hassett said, well, no one who's being fired for poor performance ever actually admits that they had poor performance. But the administration's point of view here is that these are cuts that are necessary, and these are cuts that are really going toward the overall goal of cutting a lot of what they see as waste, fraud, and abuse from the government, Gabe.
Yeah, the White House is repeatedly touting that it's cutting waste from the government. But President Trump had also some less than stellar marks on the economy in these polls. So I want to play what he said about the economy on Fox earlier this week.
Inflation is back. I'm only here for 2.5 weeks.
That was January.
Inflation is back.
For a week.
No, think of it. Inflation's back. And they said, oh, Trump, inflation. I had nothing to do with it. These people have run the country. They spent money like nobody's ever spent.
So, Yamiche, how long can the president get away with blaming Biden? Does the White House have any plans in the works to fight inflation?
It's really interesting because I think it's going to be a telltale sign how much time he has to continue to blame President Biden when it comes to the voters, the people who put him in office. I think we're going to continue to check back in with people to see if they've sort of grown tired of the mantra that this is something that they had to fix and it's going to take a long time. So think about the president saying this just a short time ago. He said that we're ending trillions of dollars of waste. We will rapidly grow our economy by dramatically shrinking the government. So there he's talking about the fact that cutting the federal workforce is going to help with inflation. You also had Kevin Hassett at the White House briefing. I want to read part of what he said. He said, we're incredibly optimistic about the future of inflation and the future of our economy. We also heard Vice President J.D. Vance today saying that it's just going to take time to cut down inflation. So really the big message here is give him a little bit of time, but there is, they say, activities and actions going on to try to cut down inflation. Of course, there's still a lot of big questions because Americans are waiting for costs to go down, especially cost of living, since President Trump ran on that promise, Gabe. And
Yamiche, we're just learning that President Trump is holding an event for Black History Month. It's just about to get underway or just started. What can you tell us about the event and about the guest list?
It's really interesting. One of the things that I think we need to underscore is that the president signed this executive order ending diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. And as a result, a number of agencies actually canceled their cultural celebrations, not just Black History Month celebrations, but also Martin Luther King celebrations, as well as Women's History Month, Holocaust Remembrance Day, a lot of cultural events that agencies used to just sort of praise and celebrate the differences and diversity among us. So it's really interesting to see the president say, well, he's going to have this Black History Month event. I don't exactly know who the guest list is, but it's going to be very interesting to see who gathers there and what the president says, and also how he sort of explains why he wanted to have this celebration, given the fact that he's been so critical of diversity, equity, and inclusion programs across the country.
Yamiche Alcindor at the White House will continue to monitor that event and bring you any news from it. And from the looks at that video, we see Tiger Woods at that event. So, Courtney, Kube, I want to turn now to you. What can you tell us about the 8% cut the administration wants to see at the Pentagon? How much is that in dollars? And what would need to get the axe to get to that number?
Yeah, so I think, Gabe, we should really look at this less as cuts to the budget and more as reallocation. So the 8% is supposed to be cut from the majority of the Department of Defense overall budget. There's 17 different agencies, combatant commands, departments that have been exempted. And frankly, those are agencies or combatant commands that are more in line with some of the priorities that President Donald Trump has, some of his national security priorities. So when you exempt those 17 and then you look at the overall DoD budget for FY26, it comes to about $50 billion that are expected to be taken out of the overall DoD budget. Now, that is going to prioritize getting rid of things that are not in line with President Trump's priorities. So things like diversity and equity and inclusion programs and policies. Also climate change, the sorts of things that we have already, frankly, over the last month plus have been hearing from President Trump and from those around him that they no longer want to prioritize. Instead, that $50 billion is more likely to go things like the southern border, protecting the border, the Indo-Pacific Command, China, some big programs that the president has spoken out about. So, yes, this is taking money away from the DoD budget, but at the end of the day, we expect that to be reallocated to other priorities, Gabe.
Okay, so Courtney, they want these cuts, as the White House is also calling on more defense spending in Congress. How do you square that?
Yeah, and that's exactly what this is. I mean, right now we're going off what we have, which is this 8% cut, the $50 billion. But the reality is, Gabe, I do expect, because we have been hearing from people close to President Trump in Capitol Hill, at the White House, frankly, even here in the building, about how we expect the defense budget to ultimately grow, not shrink here. And look, that's keeping, frankly, completely in line with what we have been hearing about how the president has talked about needing to rebuild the military. Secretary Hegseth frequently talks about making the military more lethal. It will involve making cuts in certain areas. So if you're thinking of something like a military unit, I would expect to see cuts to the headquarters unit, but to see additional, as Secretary Hegseth calls them, additional war fighters or additional equipment for those warfighters going forward. It's really more about reallocating the priorities here than anything else at this point, Gabe.
And Courtney, you also have some reporting that the defense secretary is discussing firing some top military officers. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that's right. So this is something we've been hearing for some time now, and we're just expecting now that it's pretty imminent at this point. So these are general officers and flag officers who have, in some way, have been identified as people that the president does not want to have serve under him anymore. Now, keep in mind, Gabe, this is a new administration. He has the right to choose the general and flag officers to serve in his administration. The reason this is getting some attention, though, is not because of what these people have done, but the jobs they have held. So we're expecting the people who are singled out here to have close ties to the former Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin. Perhaps they've been assigned to jobs that have had a diversity or equity and inclusion sort of role or policies that they've had to enact. Again, policies that were implemented by the civilian leadership of the military, and these uniformed service members had to enact them or carry them out. Or people who may be seen as having policies or opinions that are contrary to President Trump. Again, keep in mind, these are senior military officers, general and flag officers. They do not set the policy here in the Pentagon or throughout the Department of Defense. They carry out the civilian leadership's policies, but it seems as if they will be targeted for no other reason than carrying out the roles and the jobs that they were assigned to, Gabe.
Courtney Kube, live for us at the Pentagon. Courtney, thank you. I want to turn now to Julie Tsirkin, live on Capitol Hill. Julie, I want to start with Mitch McConnell's announcement that he won't be running for another term. What else did we hear from him today?
Well, he gave a floor speech, Gabe, and certainly this was not a surprise to his fellow colleagues in the Senate. It really wasn't a surprise to anyone that he decided at 83 years old, today is his birthday, by the way, to not seek an 8th term in 2026. He served as the longest serving leader of either party in the Senate, as you mentioned, and then he stepped down from that role, of course, because his popularity was shrinking given all of his entanglements and his back and forth with Trump. Even, of course, before he won in November, it was very clear that McConnell could not continue his role in leading the conference. I remember a moment last year, for example, when he was trying to push his members to vote for Ukraine aid. None of them wanted to buck what Trump wanted, even though he wasn't in the White House at that time. And ultimately, Speaker Johnson and Trump hashed out a deal. And so his influence was certainly waning, and he understood that. We've seen from him in the last couple of weeks vote against 3 of Trump's nominees. Today, I should note, he did vote for Kash Patel, which I thought was interesting, given that he certainly doesn't align with him on much. And on the Senate floor, he did give a speech saying that while he is going away, he said that his critics won't be happy to know that he will not be silent, and that's what his fellow colleagues told me too.
Yeah, on that point, shortly after McConnell's speech, we saw the Senate approve Kash Patel as the new FBI director. Is that a pretty accurate reflecting of how this Senate majority is largely just giving a thumbs up to everything Trump wants?
Absolutely. I think we saw that starting from Pete Hegseth's vote. Of course, all the reporting surrounding him, the controversy that he was embroiled in, the Republicans who privately were saying that they would vote against him. Ultimately, most of them went out and voted for him. I think that was a pretty good signal for us. And then, of course, we saw that happen with Tulsi Gabbard again. Kash Patel never really had that kind of Republican opposition materialize like those other 2 did. Of course, we saw Lisa Murkowski vote against him today. Also, Susan Collins. They also voted against some of Trump's other nominees. But McConnell voting yes for him. Democrats continued to push back even this morning. Dick Durbin standing in front of the FBI headquarters calling Kash Patel a political hack. This is somebody who, of course, had some Hill experience, but most notably was a Trump ally and served for him in the first administration during the last critical moments on January 6th. And he wanted a clean house at the FBI. And this is really the investigative arm of the DOJ. So Kash Patel said he wants to clean house. There was a moment of concern where Democrats said that he might have perjured himself when he said he had no idea that people were being fired from the FBI before he even was officially confirmed for this position today. None of that really matters because all of the Republicans, but those 2, went in line. And when they have a 4-seat majority, of course, that 4th vote being J.D. Vance's tie-breaking one, they can pretty much do whatever Trump tells them to do, and they certainly are going to.
Julie Tsirkin on Capitol Hill. Julie, thank you. And coming up, the human impact of the government's layoffs reverberating well beyond the Beltway. We'll hear from a Marine veteran who lost a job he considers a calling, working with veterans. His story is next. Plus, the potential political impact of these layoffs as communities across America brace for turmoil for their federal employees and their local economies. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Hey, welcome back. In the first month of the Trump administration, thousands of civil service workers have been laid off as the White House and Elon Musk work to slash the size of the federal government. And the cuts aren't just being felt here in Washington, D.C. About 80% of the federal workforce lives outside this region. Like in Kansas City, the federal government is the largest employer. At least 1,000 IRS employees there are expected to be laid off. Or in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where Marine veteran Andrew Lennox started working at the VA hospital last year. But as a probationary employee, he was fired late last week. NBC's Garrett Haake spoke to him about being forced out of the job he loves.
After leaving the military, there's like you kind of feel alone. You know, people don't really understand, you know, how you think or why you think that way. And like, that's cool. We understand that. But the second I walked into a VA hospital and just, again, stepping into the building, interacting with, you know, Vietnam veterans, you know, older ones, younger ones, people that like finally understand you, they understand your jokes, you know, why you walk the way you do, why you talk. And then like, these are the people that I was serving with, you know, these are the people that created the institutions that made me who I am in the Marines. And like, I'd love nothing better to like help them. It's my family.
Yeah, this doesn't sound like a job. This sounds like a calling. Yeah,
Absolutely. So like, I think somebody compared it to like, you know, you can have a lot of jobs that make you happy, but there's very few that can make you proud. And it was something that made me proud that, you know, I was being able to serve again.
What do you think the people who see jobs like yours as lines on a spreadsheet are missing.
Again, there is absolutely no denying that there are areas where our government agencies can be made more efficient. There's no way to say they're perfectly running machines, but it's all about the execution and perhaps the input from the people that are running these places that should be taken into account. Because from my perspective, somebody looked at a spreadsheet who has no idea what happens in our hospital, no idea what my position is, but they saw it, not a doctor, not a nurse, probationary, you're not in a union, click. They didn't ask my supervisor if he was okay with it. They didn't consult the director of our hospital if she was okay with it, or even what my job was. And if I was to be removed, can we continue? And I think that shows the care and attention to detail and forethought that they put into this process, or lack thereof. These are very complex and fragile institutions that if you try and you slash away, it grinds to a halt. And this isn't something that you can just bankrupt and start over again next month, whenever. It's going to affect people. These aren't customers. These are patients. These are veterans. It's convenient to create an enemy that everyone's against us. But we're federal work. I'm just trying to help veterans. It's postal work. It's all these people. We're not some deep state that has ulterior motives. I want to go to work. I want to help veterans. And I want to do it again, and I'd like to do it continually. And I don't want to be dragged into these politics. My job is to take care of veterans and to help make sure our doctors and nurses and providers can do it. I don't care whose picture's on the wall downstairs.
Thanks to Garrett Haig for that reporting, and to Andrew Lennox for sharing his story. And joining me now is the panel: Deepa Shivram, White House correspondent at NPR; Naveen Nayak, president of the Center for American Progress Action Fund; and Rob Bluey, president and executive editor at the Daily Signal. Thank you all so much for joining me. And Deepa, I want to start with you. We just heard that story in Garrett's interview. There's a human side to these layoffs. As more and more stories start to trickle out, do you think that will have an impact on how they're perceived across the country?
I think so, and I think it's so important that the reporting that Garrett is doing, and people who are federal workers have jobs that also serve their communities and their public, right? And when you try to turn the light switch off overnight, there are going to be consequences, and we might not see that immediately. It might be months and potentially years down the line to get the full scope of what it means to cull down the federal workforce this dramatically. But I think there are some immediate impacts that people are seeing right now in their communities. I've seen a lot on social media today about national parks workers getting cut and what that means. IRS workers right ahead of tax season. There are immediate impacts to trying to change something like the federal workforce literally in the span of days and weeks. And it really does cause a lot of chaos and confusion, and especially when it's services that people are dealing with.
And Deepa, I want to get your thoughts on this next point, and Rob, you as well. We put up these numbers earlier. Just over a majority of respondents think that Trump's executive actions have gone too far. You see those numbers right there. It's a Washington Post Ipsos poll. 57% think he's gone too far. What do those numbers mean to you, and are you surprised to see where they're at right now?
It is interesting because I do feel like just in covering this White House in the last couple of weeks, I mean, the amount of executive authority that is being exercised here is something that they're bragging about. One, it came up in the White House briefing today, right, talking about how President Trump has signed more executive orders than Joe Biden, more executive orders than Barack Obama.
And they argue voters chose this.
And they argue that it's a good thing that they're doing. But it is such a stark contrast coming from, covering the Biden administration. Executive powers of the president like this are not meant to be done every day. This is not a way to legislate or run the country. It's, typically meant as, you maybe couldn't get something done, so it's an emergency or something like that. The way that President Trump has used this power just in an extraordinary amount of time, which is very little time, is very stark and very shocking.
Well, Rob, what do you think of this? Just about 2 weeks ago, there was a poll that showed Trump's job approval. The majority of Americans supported what he was doing. So what do you make of those numbers?
Well, even as you look at the poll that came out, you talked about the CNN poll earlier, 75% of the people in that poll said that they expected Trump to do these things that he's doing. I mean, they may not agree with all of it, but they, I think, recognize that he said these types of things on the campaign trail. So they're not necessarily surprised, Gabe, that he's carrying out these things. To your point about the executive orders, I think this is why it's critically important for Congress to follow through and actually legislate on these issues, because the next president could come in and just wipe a lot of these clean.
Well, speaking of Congress, I want to put up some of the comments that some of these Republican lawmakers are saying right now, defending some of these cuts. For example, in Alaska, Congressman there saying it's important for us to think about this as a way to diversify our economic base. In Oregon, Congressman there, Cliff Benz, saying we have to stop spending so much money, and President Trump is doing his best to take action in that regard. What do you make of those answers? You know, cutting spending is easier to defend, but as we just saw in that interview, it gets tougher to defend when there are real people behind these layoffs. For example, Kansas City is, you know, preparing for potentially thousands of layoffs.
Sure, and I think as a conservative, I am sympathetic and don't like to see anybody lose their job. At the same time, we are running a $2 trillion, trillion with a T, deficit in our federal budget, so you have to look somewhere to make cuts. I think part of the problem is that the reason they're going after probationary employees, it's so difficult to terminate or remove other employees who have been in the federal government for a long time. So yes, would I like to see reforms in the federal workforce? Absolutely. I think members of Congress who have been talking a good game about cutting spending for a long time but have failed to follow through on the actions are now going to have an opportunity with this budget reconciliation bill to actually prove that they are willing to make the cuts necessary.
Naveen, do Democrats see an opportunity here, though, talking about these cuts and the human impact of this?
Absolutely. I mean, this is where conservatives and MAGA in particular are really good at campaigning and disastrous at governing. The American people did not vote for stories like Andrew's 1 month into this. And it's not Andrew personally. Remember, he serves veterans. I don't think once in the campaign Donald Trump said, I'm going to make life worse for veterans in this country by cutting services they depend on. But that is what he's doing. Musk and Trump can do this when it's Twitter because, you know, Twitter doesn't work well. Who cares?
And speaking of Musk and those polls, a majority said that putting Musk in a position of prominence is a bad idea. Is he easier to attack for Democrats than President Trump?
I mean, I think they're both going to own what happens here, and every Republican and every congressman is going to own these cuts. Farmers are not getting payments they were promised as a result of contracts. Daycare centers are not opening. People's heating bills are going up because they cut off the program that funds people's heat. In the winter, we are having a cold spell. These are all consequences that Trump, MAGA, Musk own, and I think this is an interesting comparison. The ACA was very unpopular until what? Until Donald Trump attacked it and the Republicans tried to repeal it. Then it was one of the most popular policies in this country. Conservatives spent 40 years attacking government, and now they are dismantling it. And guess what? The American people are going to wake up and go, oh, wait a second. That's what you meant by government? You meant my Medicare? You meant my food stamps? They're going to freak out. And they're going to own it.
Look, Rob, Musk is getting set to take the stage at CPAC any moment now. He is central to the Republican Party here at this point. How would you rate his performance thus far? The criticism is, oh, he wasn't elected, but he, you know, says President Trump says that, you know, he's giving him a broad range of authority, but the buck stops with the president. How is Musk doing right now?
Well, political leaders never want to use the word no. Of course, they want to appease their constituents and the American people. So I think that's why, to your point, it's difficult. And it's why probably somebody like Elon Musk has a unique ability to go in because he's not elected and look and use his skills as somebody who's led successful companies to help the president make these choices. He is incredibly popular with conservatives right now. I think they appreciate what he's done at X, giving them a platform of free speech where they can openly communicate their ideas. And having been at CPAC earlier today, I can tell you that that crowd will embrace him enthusiastically.
Unelected person, though, just to emphasize.
Carrying out the wishes of the president.
Unelected.
Well, speaking of one elected person, Deepa, I want to get your thoughts really quickly on major development today. Mitch McConnell saying he's not running for re-election. What do you make of that and his legacy here in the Senate?
I mean, look, a long career in the Senate has seen so many presidents come through a lot of different agendas and has certainly shaped, I think, the Republican Senate and their priorities and what that has looked like for years and years and years now. You know, his health concerns the last couple months, years, it's been very top of mind. If you Google Mitch McConnell recently, that's a lot of things that are likely to come up. But, you know, to me, I'm kind of thinking about it in a way of like, what is Mitch McConnell's Republican Party and the Republican Party that was the majority of his career versus the Republican Party that exists now. And if he's gone in the Senate, you know, really how much of a difference does that make given where we are politically?
Speaking of that, I want to play something quickly Josh Hawley said today about the Senate's budget plan and get your reaction on the other side. Let's listen.
Trump wants us to move forward with it, then I will support it. If he doesn't, then I won't. So I'm going to be with him on it. I'll take his direction. If he doesn't support it, there's not a lot of point in it. If he supports the Senate moving forward, then that's fine. It's his agenda, so I'll support it. But if not, then it doesn't seem to me like it's It's, you know, an exercise that has a lot of points. So,
if he doesn't take a position either way, what's your plan then? Will you vote against it?
I mean, I'll ask for his instruction. So I'm sure he'll give. The president's usually pretty good about expressing his opinion.
So, Naveen, is there a co-equal branch of government
I think
here?
there's 4 million voters in Missouri who are like, who did I vote for exactly? Wasn't I supposed to vote for a senator that would have a voice? I mean, this is really something where you now have a branch of government, a party that is completely at the whim of one individual, even though they were elected to represent their constituents and their interests. And he's saying, listen, I don't have an opinion. Donald Trump tells me what to do, and that's what I do.
Rob, what do you make of that?
Well, for years now, Mitch McConnell hasn't been representing the interests of his constituents. They overwhelmingly supported Donald Trump, and he's voted against a couple of his nominees and his policy priorities. In terms of what the Senate and the House need to do, Gabe, they need to come to an agreement and get this budget reconciliation bill done quickly. The president is waiting on this money and these resources to carry out his agenda. And so I understand that there are narrow margins in both houses of Congress, but whether they go with one bill or two bills, they need to get together and make it happen.
What is clear, President Trump will definitely have quite the say. Thank you all so much for joining me here at the panel. Deepa, Naveen, Rob, thank you so much. And up next, we're breaking down President Trump's executive order calling for an end to federal benefits for undocumented migrants as questions emerge over just what benefits that order could affect. You're watching Meet the Press now. Stay with us. Welcome back. The Trump administration's effort to end birthright citizenship is facing another legal setback as the White House takes new actions targeting undocumented immigrants. An appeals court has declined to reinstate the president's birthright citizenship order after a lower court blocked the executive order from taking effect. The three-judge panel ruling that the Justice Department did not make a strong enough argument that the order did not violate the 14th Amendment. It comes as the Trump administration has told organizations that give federally funded legal representation to unaccompanied migrant children to halt their work, and as the president signs an executive order to terminate federal benefits for undocumented immigrants. And joining me now here on set, NBC News Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley. Julia, thank you so much for joining me. What is the next step here?
Yeah, I mean, look, the White House, as you know, has to review exactly which benefits they're going to cut off. But some of those could include infant assistance. This assistance that goes out to pregnant women and young babies. It includes healthy foods for women who are about to have babies and infant formula. That has always been something that's been protected, but they're looking at whether or not that can cut off. I understand, as I believe you understand as well, that they aren't trying to go after free and reduced lunch programs for undocumented children.
At least not yet.
At least not yet. You're right. They don't rule anything out yet. And then there are some states that do allow some welfare benefits to go, allow people in those states access to federal welfare dollars, especially if they're on a parole program. And as you know, over 800,000 people came in under those programs under Biden.
Do you think that this is having the desired deterrent effect at this point? I was just at the border just yesterday, and as you well know as well, illegal border crossings are down significantly. Is, you know, besides the tightening of asylum restrictions, essentially shutting down the asylum program, but also halting some of these programs in the interior, is it having the desired effect?
You know, I don't know exactly if that is the thing that we see on these messages from people telling their family members to come or people communicating with smugglers, the messages that go out. It seems more likely like what you're seeing, that people are not being able to cross the border in the immediate effect. So it begs the question, is it necessary to cut off some of these benefits to go through this amount of pain for, you know, it could be young children, so that that message somehow trickles down to the person who's thinking about leaving Venezuela? It's not clear that that's the direct deterrent effect that they wanted to have, but certainly it does serve to try to show the base that none of their federal tax dollars will go toward these things, although we should point out that emergency rooms still need to take care of anyone who walks through the door. So if someone's not being able to get life-saving nutrition, those people could end up in your emergency room.
These measures are expected to get an avalanche of legal challenges, are they not?
Yeah, of course, as we've seen for legal challenges across a lot of these executive orders. And some states could say that they're burdened by not being able to give out that medicine because or nutrition or whatever those assistance programs might be, because then they have to deal with the after effects. And you could also argue that if this money was already allocated by Congress, that Trump isn't in his position to be able to cut off those funds.
You know, I spoke with a White House official today, and also we had Stephen Miller at the White House briefing touting that, you know, they view immigration as perhaps the administration's biggest success of its first month. What have you been hearing that the administration is considering? What other measures are they considering that they haven't implemented yet?
I understand there's a stack of executive orders that, you know, whether that's metaphorical or not, but that Trump can continue to drip out, to continue to make news on immigration. I think at the border, sure, they can call that a success, although, of course, it's challenged because they've completely shut down the asylum process at the border. As far as arrests and deportations, though, I don't know that they can call that a success yet, because as we've seen, those numbers are not high enough really to please the president yet. And we know that's something he's been angry about. Yeah, and the question will be, a lot of questions for Congress as well. Will they fund that deportation effort? That still remains an open question. Yeah, and they need that. Julia Ainsley, our Homeland Security correspondent, thanks so much. And after the break, President Trump doubles down on his criticism of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy as the administration criticizes Europe and lauds Russia. You're watching Meet the Press now. Stay with us. Welcome back. U.S. Special Envoy Keith Kellogg was in Ukraine today, where he met with President Zelenskyy. The two were set to hold a joint news conference in Kyiv, but Ukraine's presidential spokesperson said the event was canceled by way of a request from the U.S. side. It comes after President Trump and Zelenskyy publicly traded barbs yesterday, with President Trump doubling down on some of his sharpest criticisms last night.
But think of it, a modestly successful comedian. President Zelenskyy talked the United States of America into spending $350 billion to go into a war that basically couldn't be won. A dictator without elections. Zelenskyy better move fast, or he's not going to have a country left.
Today, the president's national security advisor, Mike Waltz, tried to explain the growing tensions between the two leaders.
Some of the rhetoric coming out of Kyiv, frankly, and insults to President Trump were unacceptable. And look, President Trump is obviously very frustrated right now with President Zelenskyy. The fact that that he hasn't come to the table, that he hasn't been willing to take this opportunity that we have offered. I think he eventually will get to that point.
Waltz was also pressed multiple times and dodged multiple times when asked about President Trump's false claim that Ukraine started the war.
After the president's post on Truth Social yesterday, need to know, who does he think is more responsible for the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Putin or Zelenskyy?
Well, look, his goal, Peter, is to bring this war to an end, period.
You wrote in an op-ed in the fall of 2023 that, quote, Putin is to blame, certainly like Al-Qaeda was to blame for 9/11. Do you still feel that way now, or do you share the president's assessment as he says Ukraine is to blame for the start of this war?
Well, it shouldn't surprise you that I share the president's assessment on all kinds of issues. What I wrote as a member of Congress was as a former member of Congress. Look, what I share the president's assessment on is that the war has to end.
Notably, Waltz did not call Vladimir Putin a dictator in that press conference. And according to three sources familiar with the situation, on the third anniversary of the Russian invasion, the U.S. is declining to co-sponsor a UN draft resolution affirming Ukraine's territorial integrity. Join me now here on set is NBC News global security reporter Dan Luce. Dan, thank you so much for joining us. Look, NBC reporting says that really, it's been within the past week that the relationship between the U.S. and Ukraine has imploded. Around the time that Mark Vogel was released from Russia, where does this leave the U.S. standing in the world?
It turns everything upside down. I think it's really hard to overstate the significance of this. This is not just sort of political rhetoric or being provocative, right? This is the U.S. kind of upending its whole approach to the world. And Russia was always seen as an adversary since after World War II. And the NATO alliance was built to deter and to counter the threat that Russia was posing. And really, except for a brief period there in the 90s, Russia has always been seen as this country that the U.S. had to be wary of and to be cautious about.
Well, look, the Trump administration will argue, look, there's some movement in terms of a possible peace deal here that wasn't happening during the Biden administration, that President Trump is doing what he needs to do, perhaps flattering Vladimir Putin, and his goal is to end this war. What do you make of that argument?
Well, that's their argument, right? And I think every European government and the Ukrainians and a lot of senators, even Republicans privately, say that the only movement that's happened is the Trump administration bringing Russia in from the cold and actually offering them concessions up front. What has Russia done actually to try to end the war? They, of course, started the war.
Trump campaigned on this America First foreign policy. So why do you think our traditional allies are so shocked here? They're really struggling to respond.
Yeah, I think on the one hand, they knew they were bracing for yet more difficulty with a president who doesn't really buy into the idea of U.S. alliances the way his predecessors did. But I think even they were shocked at the scale of this, that he would call Zelenskyy a dictator, for example.
How are our adversaries responding to this? You know, Russia, obviously, China, Iran. How are they receiving all this?
Right. So the allies are not only shocked, but I think they have to recalculate, will the U.S. even come to our aid in the future? And as far as Russia, China, and Iran, this is very good news for Russia, obviously. And I think China, too, sees a vacuum developing. I think they sense the potential that the U.S. is sort of withdrawing from Europe and maybe even elsewhere in the world, and that our alliance system is unraveling. And so this is a moment for them, an opportunity to do what they've been wanting to do, which is basically displace the U.S. as the world's dominant power.
And according to NBC News reporting, several days ago, Treasury Secretary, gave Zelenskyy this document to sign away half of their rare earth minerals in exchange for U.S. aid. Zelenskyy, as far as we know, still has not signed that. Where does that stand? Is it in limbo?
I think the Zelenskyy government was actually open to a discussion about this. I mean, they recognize they've got to be flexible. But I think what they were not ready to do was to sign a deal right then and there with a virtual gun to their head within an hour or 24 hours.
Yeah, you're just given a short time to do it.
That's right. And Zelenskyy is saying, I need something in return, some kind of security guarantee, because they're worried that Russia will just invade again if there's some kind of ceasefire.
Dan Luce, thank you so much. We appreciate your time. And an update now on Pope Francis's medical condition as he continues to recover from pneumonia in both lungs. Today, the Vatican told reporters that the Pope has focal pneumonia, which means the infection is not widespread. The director of the Holy See press office says Pope Francis is in stable condition and blood tests have shown a slight improvement. Italy's prime minister, who visited the Pope at Rome's Gemelli Hospital yesterday, said he was alert and responsive, adding that he has not lost his proverbial sense of humor. The 88-year-old pontiff has been hospitalized since February 14th. And turning now to the Middle East, it has been a somber day in Israel after Hamas returned the bodies of 4 hostages taken during the October 7th attack. The handover took place in the southern Gaza city of Khan Yunis. It's the first return of hostages' bodies under the current ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas. Forensic testing is needed before authorities can confirm identities. But the bodies are believed to include Kafir and Ariel Bibas, who were just 8 months old and 4 years old when they were taken along with their mother, Shiri. Another hostage, 84-year-old Oded Lifshitz, was also believed to be handed over. Israel is expecting 6 more of the living hostages still being held to be released on Saturday in exchange for hundreds of Palestinians being held in Israeli prisons. And after the break, a reporter in Kenya details what she's seeing and hearing on the ground in Africa as the Trump administration aims to slash foreign aid programs that millions of people rely on. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. President Trump's rapid moves to remake the government are affecting not just people here in the U.S., but also millions of people around the world. In particular, the Trump administration's effort to freeze all funding for the U.S. Agency for International Development, sending shockwaves around the globe, particularly in countries that rely on humanitarian assistance from the U.S. for food assistance, health and medical resources, as well as anti-terror programs. Joining me now is Washington Post Nairobi correspondent Catherine Haro. Thank you so much for joining us, Catherine. What are you seeing and hearing on the ground? What are the real-world impacts of the freeze in USAID money for communities in Africa?
Well, it's been very chaotic ever since this freeze was announced. You have a situation where anti-terrorism funding has been frozen. Food was initially affected, although the biggest agency, the World Food Program, now says that its food is moving. You have situations where, Kenya is looking at losing 40,000 health workers who help prevent HIV. So there's lots of layoffs, lots of panic, and lots of people who just don't know whether they're going to be able to get life-saving medicine, healthcare, shelter, lots of other things that help them survive.
And Catherine, the White House has tied many of its latest actions to combating what it calls waste, fraud, and abuse in government. You touched on this a little bit, but really explain to viewers what types of aid countries in Africa are receiving and why it's so important for them.
Well, a big chunk of it is what's called humanitarian assistance. So those are the things that you need to stay alive: clean water, food aid, medicine, life-saving medicine. Another big chunk of it is the PEPFAR program, which has saved, I think, 26 million lives since it began. That's to help combat the spread of HIV/AIDS. And then other programs look at things like pro-democracy programs or programs that promote the freedom of the press. There's programs that help protect human rights defenders. So, for example, if you're documenting war crimes and then you have to leave the country quickly, that programs help people like that.
Now, it's not just food and humanitarian assistance, but also military aid that could be shut off. What are some of the impacts of that?
So we've seen counter-IED programs shut down in Kenya. We've seen programs to patrol the border of Somalia using drones shut down. We've seen training programs for militaries on the edges of the Sahel shut down. We've seen the forensics lab in Mogadishu, which feeds fingerprints from crime scenes to the FBI. That's not working anymore either. So it's had a huge impact on counterterrorism programs.
And Catherine, look, as we mentioned, the administration has been saying that within USAID, there was an incredible amount of what it calls waste, abuse, and even fraud, although it's provided no evidence of that. What's your response to those allegations? Was there a large amount of waste in USAID? And what do you say to the supporters of President Trump who voted for him, who argue, look, we want the government to take a close look at some of these programs?
Well, of course, voters are entitled to vote for whoever they want. I can't respond to allegations of fraud because I haven't seen any that have been supported by evidence yet. I have reported on things like the shutdown of food aid in Ethiopia last year when it emerged that there was diversion of food aid that was supposed to go to families that have been displaced by conflict and poor families. And the entire distribution of food aid was shut off for 6 months. Now, I went up to the refugee camps on the Ethiopia-Sudan border, and I saw the women who were so thin that you could see their ribs underneath their collarbones. So I met with families who had had children go back into Sudan, into the civil war, looking for food and had their boys kidnapped by militias. So there is an immediate effect when these things are shut down. And I know that they are sometimes shut down if fraud is uncovered or if diversion is uncovered. I've reported on that myself in Somalia during the famine in 2011 when I followed trucks of food aid that were being diverted to warehouses.
So difficult to hear those stories, Catherine. Now, USAID was a critical agency to help promote U.S. soft power. So are you seeing signs that other countries are moving in to fill this gap in aid? For example, China.
Well, the Chinese ambassador gave a speech in Nairobi this weekend, just reassuring Kenya that they could rely on China and that China wasn't going to go anywhere or change its policies. She didn't comment directly on the states, but I think the message was pretty clear. Lilongwe, the capital of Malawi, has been plastered with posters for China aid. I don't think China is going to step in and fund humanitarian aid in the same way that the US has. That's just not their style. And I don't think Russia will either. I just think that there's going to be a very big gap there, and there will be instability that other countries can exploit.
Catherine Harrod, thank you so much for your time. Catherine, Washington Post, Nairobi correspondent. Thanks again.
Thank you.
And that does it for us this hour. I'm Gabe Gutierrez. We're back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. The news continues with Zinkley Asamoah in for Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.